Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all later. Bye.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Since analog horror has become so popular, you might be asking yourself, where in the world did this stuff start? Well, some people might point to the local 58, others something else. I would go back further than that. I'm going way back, and I mean to 1938. Before I go back to 1938 though, I want to just give a quick definition. If you don't know what analog horror is, first let me be the first one to ask you, how's your first day on the internet been? I hope it's been good, but now it's time to ruin your day. Analog horror is horror that is told through analog media. It plays off of nostalgia, usually like an old news broadcast or old videotapes someone found with creepy stuff on them, and it's all very disturbing. So go ahead and head on back to 1938 with me, and we will explore the very first analog horror. Well, I mean, not really. The first famous analog horror, Orson Welles' radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. So this is a classic story that has urban legend tied to it. That, everyone was freaking out because everyone thought it was real, because the broadcast was made to sound like a real news broadcast, being interrupted by this Martian invasion. It gradually got worse before it eventually took over the entire news broadcast. That's all they were talking about, and then ended with the reporter dying in a very horrifying scene in the radio play, and I'll play that right now.
It's 50 feet. X2L calling CQ. To X2L calling CQ. To X2L calling CQ, New York. And anyone on the air? And anyone on the air? And anyone? To X2L.
That is extremely indicative of what would eventually become analog horror as we know it today. The reason that is analog horror and not just a horror movie playing on a TV, is that the conventions of the media you're listening to it from are manipulating you. you're listening to a news broadcast that's broadcasting a Martian invasion. A lot of modern analog horror stories are you're watching a news broadcast that is being hacked by some aliens or like ghosts or like some demons, things like that. And actually, a lot of modern analog horror is just a scary story being told with a VHS filter over it, so it's not really analog horror. But I digress. If you had been listening to this broadcast from the beginning, you knew it was a radio play. If you had even been listening halfway through and caught what am I listening to, and then caught a station identification, you would have known it was a radio play. But if you're just switching through like your little radio stations way back in 1938, you know, the Great Depression, looming World War II, all kinds of fun things were happening in 1938. Everyone was always crowded around their radio at night listening. So at 8 p.m. on Halloween night, when this went live, people probably were, you know, scrolling through the stations trying to find something. And if you just so happened to catch this, imagine just sitting down to a casual family dinner and hearing this.
Flame! Now the whole field's caught up by the woods. They're about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill.
So there, for the first time, the entire world, well, America, experienced analog horror. And from there, it kind of faded into obscurity. I'm sure more radio plays similar to that one were done, so analog horror survived in that way. But really, it came into it big in 1964 with the release of The Outer Limits. But before we talk about The Outer Limits, we got to talk about how we got to The Outer Limits. And we would have never had something like The Outer Limits if it weren't for The Twilight Zone. But we would have never had The Twilight Zone if it weren't for One Step Beyond. So One Step Beyond and The Twilight Zone both premiered in the same year, so they were likely being worked on at the same time. They probably owe their success to things like Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Veil. However, these two specifically focus on something different than the other ones did coming before it. Now, One Step Beyond and The Twilight Zone are anthology series, which means that they don't really connect. None of the episodes connect to one another. They're all separate, contained stories. However, One Step Beyond and The Twilight Zone are hosted, and each episode is brought in and out with an opening narration and a closing narration. One Step Beyond was hosted by John Newland, and its legacy is pretty much just a very controversial episode in which he took ayahuasca, which basically just DMT, and on TV, and this was in the 60s, so, I mean, that's pretty insane. But that's like later on in the show's runtime. What the show started off as was a horror anthology show based on true events, and it was brought in by these opening narration segments. 9 months later, towards the end of 1959, The Twilight Zone premiered. And at first, The Twilight Zone's narrator was faceless. However, on the last episode of the first season, show creator Rod Serling finally showed his face. Whereas One Step Beyond had just always had the host right up front. So if it weren't for One Step Beyond doing that, The Twilight Zone wouldn't have done it, and The Twilight Zone wouldn't have become as popular as it was. Now, each of these shows, like I said, had a certain intro, and they always kind of found a weird way to tie the name of the show into the end of it. So in 1964, when The Twilight Zone had run its course, and I'm pretty sure One Step Beyond was done, I don't know, maybe it was still going, there was another anthology series called The Outer Limits. And this, as you saw in the intro to this video, is its intro.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can change the focus to a soft blur or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
And with this intro comes all the pieces we need for classic analog horror. Even though the rest of the episode may not fit the analog horror genre, because of this intro bringing in every single episode, and this outro bringing out every episode.
We now return control of your television set to you. Until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the outer limits.
All of the events we see in between could be categorized as analog horror.
This has gotten pretty soggy.
So if you've ever gotten creeped out at 2 o'clock in the morning watching one of those creepy analog horror videos where, aliens have taken over and are, controlling what you're watching and everything like that, you owe it all to the outer limits. I'd like to point out something that adds a certain element to the analog horror literally being on a TV. This is what TVs looked like back in 1964. So imagine for a moment, if you will, falling asleep on your couch one evening in 1964, watching the Ed Sullivan Show, whatever. You don't remember falling asleep, but when you wake up, this is playing.
There is nothing wrong with your television set.
Imagine the brief, momentary pause you might take. Panic you may feel. Once the show started, you'd probably realize it was just a show, but the likelihood that that happened is pretty low, but not zero. The thing about analog horror on YouTube is that you willingly press on that video, and you know it's a video on YouTube. The thing about the outer limits is that someone could have just flipped to that station right when that intro was playing, or woken up when that intro came on. Once they got the gist of it, they understood what was happening, but, maybe there was potential for true terror there. That harkens back to 1938, flipping through the radios, and hearing this.
Scope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity.
And hearing Orson Welles giving his legendary performance of The War of the Worlds. So this is analog horror in its truest sense, in its analog sense. It's not some VHS filter someone put on a regular video. It really was VHS tapes, it really was old TV, it really was staticky radio transmissions. And I think that makes it scarier than anything else analog horror has put out yet. Thank you all for watching. We have reached 280 something subscribers now. That's phenomenal. I couldn't be happier with that. Hopefully we continue to grow. Couldn't do it without you guys, so I just want to tell you all thank you, and I will see you in the next one.